totally open to taking a look at it if you wanted to record it and show it to them.
Well, I'm recording now. You know, thank you for making me sure that I'm doing that. What I'll do is I will save this and translate it to MP4, and then I'll create a Dropbox for you along those lines. So we're in good shape. So do you have any questions right up front in terms of, you know, you've been thinking about it, this and that? You know, do you want to share with me any questions that I might want to address as we go through this, or do you want me just to run through it?
No, you start at the top, and then I may, you know, jump in if I see something that I don't understand, perhaps.
Perfect. Perfect. I kind of assume this will be a back and forth, and my other approach is to basically, I'm going to take you down the road as if you were selling it, okay? So that I'll go into some detail along those lines. So first off, and this PowerPoint I'll send to you so that you've got it if you wish to go forward. So we position ourselves as having technology and services to do security impact analysis. So it goes beyond just your traditional vulnerability assessment. So that's kind of how I like to start to frame the conversation from the beginning. And then this slide really, I think, addresses three things that we do that no one else does. So right away, you're going to have a differentiation with your customers, okay, or potential customers. Now, the first bullet came from a DoD Defensive Cyber Operations RFI or RFP. I think it might have been an RFP. And the key element here is that they wanted something that could ingest multitudes of data sources. So there you're really looking and saying, I need to get different kinds of information all brought together. Obviously, you correlate and analyze, but then the key element is that you get a visual representation to you know, help detect, et cetera, et cetera. We actually go beyond that, where we model for potential, you know, what's the best way to improve things. So again, a lot of companies can deal with one kind of data, but very few can blend as much data as we can do. The second thing that we have is we have found a way to automate the assessment. And most people really bitch about how long it takes to get things done. It takes too long to get, you know, actionable information. So we figured out how to do that. So that is a very big plus in our column. And then the third thing is this NIST risk equation. I like this one, and this gets to the heart of what people, I think, are interested in. And so the risk equation is the vulnerability times the threat times the consequence. And that's the real big issue here, that many people that provide an assessment don't give you a context for what's going to be happening. What do you do first? And I'll go into that a little bit later. But I did a demo for somebody who was a CISO for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I said, which of these three do you like? And he went, all of them. Let's go. You know, so it really resonated with him. So as you're talking to people, if you're going to go, well, what makes you different than blah, 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 these three things make us different, okay? And I'll go into detail as we go. I always like to have, I love this picture on the right-hand side because, you know, most organizations think about boiling the ocean. I have to have a total solution. But what's happening now is that people aren't looking for a total solution. They're looking for something that will, you know, enhance what they already have. This whole rip and replace is crazy, you know? So we like to position ourselves as being interoperable with other technologies, and people tend to like that. That's the whole point behind this little picture, but I love the picture here.
Oh, it's excellent. It's such a well-used, it's so well used in that. And the reality is that so many CISOs definitely,
Yeah.
they don't want a tool that does more. They want you to do one thing very well, right? So
now this one, I'm going to agree with you, but this lends itself to this slide right here. We really believe that in the entire market, that most people, 80% of the market needs 20% of your capability. And so when you go back up here and you say, well, we're not boiling the ocean, well, not everybody needs the ocean boiled. And so I always like to point out that you've got technologies that are on the edges, that are operational tools or hybrid tools or really specialized tools, but that most of the market out there just basically needs an assessment. Why? Because before you do any planning, remediation, budgeting, deployment, before you do anything like that, you need to do an assessment. So this is me to you. You are dealing in what I believe is a horizontal market. You've got a huge market out there where everybody who's doing business with a bank, with a hospital, with insurance, any kind of supply chain issue, they've got to have an assessment at least once a year, probably more often. Your competition out there, it's a manually intensive process, and it's becoming a commodity. Everybody says they do it, but what happens is it's just nobody makes money at it anymore. It's such a commodity that they really try and scale back what they do, like pile things on. I just think it's a really deceptive way of looking at this. I honestly do believe that if you look at an assessment as the best way to get an entry point to a new customer, I think that's the way to go. All right. So do you have any questions on this slide? Because this goes to the heart of what you're selling here, if that's okay by me to say. Your thoughts?
No, absolutely. And no, it makes perfect sense, and I'm in complete agreement. I think that they need to understand what they're trying to do before they can plan to do it, right? So, you got to understand the lay of the land and where you are in the scale of, how far along the chain you are in the security piece. So That's great.
Okay. All right, good. So I also created this little slide. I love this slide, and I know it, it's kind of, I used to have a whole lot of stuff over here on the right, but I took it out. So here is, we're going to market. You and I are going to market. So your issue is going to be, first off, the cyber market is broken up into two parts. It's either doing analytics or doing operations. Obviously, an operations issue, you have your security operations center. You might have a managed security service provider. You might have log management. You might have, Active Directory services. You might have a lot of things that are operationally based. But when it comes to analytics, there are very few things that are out there, and they're the basics. We have found a way to automate vulnerability assessment, pen testing, and elements of web app. Okay? Now, I built this XY chart because on the the Y-axis, you have the cost. Now, the cost is like the cost of selling. That's what you and I are going to go through. You're also going to talk about the cost that the client is going to have. So the higher the cost, the longer the sales cycle. So I believe this is a dynamic that exists in the marketplace. So I'm going to suggest to you that if you work with us, you're going to be able to offer them incredibly good VA and PTs for a bargain price. You can mark it up, you can take it to market, and literally we think that anyone out there is going to need your service, and then if you want to build additional services onto it, you can, but we're not involved. That's, again, a whole go-to-market strategy. You good with that?
Absolutely. No, I like that a lot.
Okay, good. So then it gets to, what is it that we really do? The market has moved from compliance, which you tested every 3 years, to now a risk management framework. And I always throw this up because there's always a techie in the crowd that says, well, what are we really looking at? What do you do? Well, we clearly have a role in 1, 2, 3, and 4. I typify it with 4. We can do a operational monitoring integration, but we're really trying to stay out of that. That's a whole different thing. So what I'm going to tell you is this helps to define for the client and for the techie that you're going to be dealing with where we fit. This also goes back to this little picture, which is we're not trying to do everything, okay? That we're all building upon specialized capabilities, all right?
Does it matter what they're using for a SIM or anything? Or you said it was technology agnostic, right?
You have to say that again. I didn't quite get that.
Oh, I said, does it matter what they're using for a SIM? Or is it tech? You said you had mentioned it being pretty much technology agnostic.
We're technology agnostic. I will start to, in fact, you're right on target with us, because now that's what I'm going to talk about in this slide, okay? So, and so bear with me as I set the groundwork. First off, when you do an assessment, obviously you have endpoint data. That's your scan data. That's going to be information about all that's going on the host by host by host, right? And then the second element is your ACLs, your access control list. And that basically says who can talk to whom, So there are different kinds of data, but we're able to blend it. Now, to address the question that you just raised, there is some scripting or prep that has to happen to get log data into this overall approach, but we can do that pretty easily, okay? So that's not a big job. We just have to work with you to be able to figure it out. But to do an assessment, most people deal with just the first two, scan data and ACLs. If they want to get into a more advanced understanding, then, we're all going to be doing well because we're going to be integrating their log data. All of this gets combined into a single visual representation. And the key is that your subject matter experts will still do all the decisions, but the amount of effort that's required to do 1,000 IPs is roughly the same amount of effort that it takes to do 10,000 IP addresses. So do you see how you can really start to position yourself in terms of the mid-market to under the large market, if you will? You with me on that?
I'm reminding myself of calling banks that didn't even have a SIM, credit unions and people that were just at the beginning stages of, and I was like, you don't have a SIM?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I can see there being a huge opportunity just in that space, let alone maybe a little bit more, maybe they're just, kind of in that beginning stages too. So yeah, there's a huge market for that.
Okay, but I clearly wanted to find what we're doing so that, I go back to this picture. We want to make it so that when you pick up the phone and go, hey, you need this, you need a VA, you need a PT, everybody needs that. And if you find people that are, quote, channel partners, in other words, they do a bunch of them, all of a sudden, you could be doing quite well. You with me?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. This is what I would typically call my intro part of this. I went into a whole lot of, back office issues with you. If this were a customer, I'd be much more official. But, so now let me go to the software, all right? What I like to do right up front is to start with a relatively small data set that is really a microcosm of what we're doing. So I'm pulling up what is the equivalent of a 6-inch Nessus report. Now, it's not uncommon for people to get like 12-inch Nessus reports, et cetera, et cetera. And from the user interface, I'm saying from point 52.244 to point 216.42, show me all possible paths of attack, okay? And now what it's just done is it's taken that tabular report and it's created a graphical representation that you can obviously move around in a bunch of different ways. You can also zoom in on it. And one of the things I like to point out is that between two subnets, you got one problem in one direction and you've got two in the other, and they're all different. So you turn to your customer and say, well, you know, let's figure out why. Okay, all of a sudden you're into additional services. But now you can also expand this, and now you're looking at point-to-point communication. So you can say, okay, where can you go from here? And it's going to show you. Now, I'm just kind of dancing through also, yeah, so the thickness of the line is going to populate all this information down below. And if you do a mouse over on the right here, it comes up and it tells you what's the problem, how do you fix it, and what is the score, the CVSS, you know, risk score. And we use this a lot, you know, later. What typically happens in a Nessus-only environment or a Qualys-only environment, they don't understand the relationships between subnets and IP addresses within subnets, and we do. Mm-hmm. So now let me take you through what we would do for you, and it's ultimately what the client would get. You can come back here and you can say, well, I can see one-to-one, but what if I wanted to say from one to anywhere? In other words, what's my downstream risk profile if I'm been found out that I've been compromised in one environment, and I'm going to move it around one IP address. And so from the green, I see where it can go, but it doesn't show me enough. So one of the things that we ask our customers to do, and what you will be asking them for, is give me a list of your high priority assets, and we bring it in. Now we're adding data to it, and I recalculate and I reposition. And so now you can see from the green, which is where we started, I got one that I need to take care of right away because it connects directly to this triangle, which represents high priority. And the other thing is I got to fix these two over here. And if I do those three things, I will have done a lot to improve my security profile versus this picture, which is, I don't know what to do first, right? So we give a little context of what we call situational awareness. Now, I'm going to go one more step. Yeah, so the next thing you do is you say, well, what if I get from anywhere to anywhere? In other words, for my client, show me all the possible paths that are going to happen. Now, I still have the high priority assets in there, but imagine if this is not 150, but it's like 1,500, 2,500, 3,500, 10,000 IP addresses, you're going to see lines all over the place. So you still got to say, I have to make order out of chaos. Well, obviously, our subject matter experts are going to come in, and we have a little button down here called Select Vulnerabilities. And what happens is it populates this table. And this is a list of all of the vulnerabilities that make up that picture. And what typically people do is they sort it by score. And they say, I only want to see the 10s. That's the Cat 1s. That's what's most important. But one of the things that we've been able to do, because we give you the ACLs, we can calculate the number of connections. So now I can look at it and say, well, why do I want to pay attention to these two down here? They are 10s, but they only affect one host and one connection. I want to be up top where they're most pervasive. So I'm going to come here and I'm simply going to go, okay, you see this? I'm going to block all this stuff down here. And I'm going to do a right click and it unclicks it. Now I can literally filter this out. And I always call this number one because I don't have much of an imagination. So it does that. And you see that it puts it in here automatically. And so now I'm going to say recalculate. So now you're looking at a different picture. So instead of looking at like, oh my God, this is everything, I now have a smaller universe to be able to work with. So what are we looking at? There are problems in these subnets, but they're not going anywhere. So you don't have to worry about them. And if you zoom in a little bit, yeah, they're isolated already because of the, in one fashion or another, they're unable to talk outside of their VLAN or their subnet. Now what are we looking at? If I want to protect everything in 105.244, I've got 3 coming in and 3 down here. So let's take a look at the 3 coming in. One problem on one machine going 3 different places. Down here, same problem, one machine going 3 different places. So really, what I've just done is if I get rid of those 2 things, then everything within 105.244 will be protected against known vulnerabilities. That's a pretty big statement. You with me on that?
Yeah, definitely.
So we went from what I call this to this, all right? I usually stop here and see if you have any questions. Are you good so far?
I am good. I just have a question, which I'm sure you get from customers all the time, which how do you determine known vulnerabilities? I'm sure you get that a lot.
Well, okay. That's a good question, so let me bring it back. Here, the scan data is going to give you a list of all the known vulnerabilities. Nessus is the one we use. We can also use Saint. We use Nessus for the most part because it's the industry leader. They can communicate with the NIST, vulnerability database. So they're constantly updating what they're scanning for. So the beauty is that we don't have to understand the tools that we use to gather the data will tell us what the most recent versions are. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's excellent.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to do this. I'm going to change. I'm going to, get to another level. Okay.
I'm starting to lose your audio a little bit.
Okay. I'm sorry. How do I sound now?
No worries.
Am I okay? Okay. Thank you for doing
a little
that.
better.
I will. Okay. A little better. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an example that we did to show some scalability, all right, and move into a whole nother level here. So I created 2 use cases, and the use case here I'm pulling in, and I'm going to say visualize it, and it literally is 4,500 IP addresses and 46,000 problems. So that's a lot of problems. It's been organized into the subnets that they have, and so it takes about 20 seconds to load, because it's doing a lot of math in the background as we speak. And so here we go. Boom. So if you look at this and say, I'm looking at a picture with 46,000 problems, and I can see 3,200 going between here, these 2 alone, you go back here and you hit this button called Select Vulnerabilities. And when you do that, you sort by connections. You say, if I get rid of these 2 things, guess what? I'm going to be in great shape. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to call it number 1 again. I still don't have any imagination. And now I recalculate. And so boom. So what we've just done is gone from here, what I call from chaos to control. There is now less than 500 vulnerabilities that I need to worry about. Now, if you look at that would be about a 1-foot Nessus report. How do you go through that and figure that stuff out? Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, yeah, well, in addition to, now this is all the stuff that, our technical wizardry does in the background. Okay, because in the bottom line, you're going to get a report, and I'll show you these reports. But now let me show you this. What we have found is, wait a minute, there's an unknown access point. And guess what? these red look like they're snort activities that we were able to pull in from logs that came from Splunk, right? And then guess what? If we expand this out and move this around, guess what? We have a database server here. We've got an email server here. So you can establish that which is most critical. And that's how we build the prioritization, because we need to know what's connecting to what. You with me so far?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is pretty
Now
cool.
let me take you through what the deliverables are, okay? So if I come back here, let me start here. So one thing that we do is we have, I'm going to do it this way so you can see what it looks like overall, okay? You know, 7 or 8 pages, you know, it's got an introduction, an executive summary, you know, you've got, you know, what was the technical process that we did. What we have here is a screenshot of one of the dashboards, and we have the visual representation. This is what it looks like. And so what's nice about this is that as you move through this, you know, your client is going to say, okay, I'm getting a full thing. And that's what they usually get. Then we go even further, okay? And this is part, and again, we do this, I don't know how we do it so well, but we do. So we create this tab, one big spreadsheet, and it's got all of your problems, and here's a dashboard. So in the dashboards, it's showing you critical, high, medium, and low with the numbers. And then below it, you've got, you know, your critical, high, mediums, and lows, so you can look at. But on the side here, you've got these links, and these links will take you to these tabs down below. And so if you look at this, here's the raw data that goes into that picture. So literally in this one, so you have a picture of what's going on, and now you have all of the data that's there. But we go even further than that, okay? Do you have a question on that? I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's great that it's right there.
Yeah, well, you're going to be amazed at what we're going to do right now. One of the things that we're able to do, I'm not going to go through that, is that we do the risk scoring. So we have the vulnerability, which is the CVSS score. And we have the threat, which is either internal or external, and we give it a value. And the way we determine the consequences having to do with either the high priority assets or those icons that we put in. So if it connects directly to a critical asset, it's a 10. But if it's a non-critical that connects, it's a 5. And if it's a 7.5. And if it's a non-critical that doesn't connect, it's a 5. So what we do is we give you a spreadsheet, and we create the score based upon where it's coming from, what it's connecting to, and the CVSS score. So let me take you through that right now. One of the things that we have here, this is one of the reports, okay? So I'm looking at a list. There's 24,000 vulnerabilities that are in this environment. And all I have to do is say, sort it largest to smallest. And guess what? Mr. Customer or Ms. Customer, here it is. This is the most critical thing you need to do. And then take it down. Why? Because of where it's coming from, what it's connecting to, and what the CVSS score is. So out of 10,000, we give you this list. Now, a lot of CIOs would rather have it in this format, and I'm going to squeeze it down a little bit. But what we've done basically is to take all of that same information that's in the CVSS score, CSV file that you were just looking at, and we put it into a prettier format. So here's your top 10. You drop it on the guy's desk and say, you need to do these things first because of what's happening.
That's awesome.
Right?
That is awesome. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
We're not even close to being totally awesome yet. Watch what happens now. What we can also do is we have the ability to do what I call an automated pen test, because we understand how everything connects, and we understand, you know, where the vulnerabilities are, and we know not only the CVSS scores, but we know the CVE scores. We can go through and run it against, you know, publicly available databases for exploits, and we can say, Mr. Customer or Ms. Customer, these are the problems that you have based upon the equipment that you have. That is totally cool.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great.
It's totally awesome. It's totally awesome.
So, I'm reading at the same point. I'm looking at all the different ones.
Okay.
Sorry, so
now what I'm going to do, so here's the process, okay? And obviously what we did was we have some technical geniuses behind me, but you know, if I let them know that, they're going to be impossible to deal with, so bear with me. What they did is created a collector, because a lot of times what we found is that the smaller the organization, the less they have, you know, from a budget point of view and from a talent point of view to be able to throw with this problem, but they still got the problem. So we use this little box, and literally it plugs in and it establishes a VPN session. And we can run all of our data gathering here and transfer it to the to our cloud in the sky and do all the prep on that. You can also VPN it, all right? So we do three things. You know, we collect the Nessus scans to understand what the endpoints are doing. We run Nmap and some other tools to calculate the ACLs that are active. And we use a spreadsheet to be able to bring it all together and create the topology, all right? Then what happens for a typical customer. Now, a typical customer is based on size. So day one, you either, you know, put the Dropbox or the collector in place, or we get a VPN connection and we start data gathering. And sometimes it's a one-day job, sometimes it's a 3-day or 4-day job. But the reality is the amount of time it takes us is a fraction of what it would take the traditional methods to do it, okay? And then on day 4, or after all the data has been gathered, we bring it all together, we do the reports, and then we provide the deliverables. Very, very basic. If it takes your competitor, if it takes your competition a month, we can do it in a week.
That's awesome.
Now, here's what it is for you. You have client control, because this will be a white label for you. All of our, it's not going to say CyVision anywhere. It's all for you, right? You have control over the client. We don't compete with you, okay? We're going to take away, if I may be so bold, the bullshit part of the work for you, because we found a way to automate it. So for us, it's not bullshit. We love it, you know? But you get to be able to build on top of that and, you know, begin a client relationship and grow it. So we frankly think it's the best way to go.